Hello, I'm going to present a tutorial on how to use locking stitch markers to keep your edges straight using a method for inserting your stitch markers that is the one that I prefer, that I always teach in my classes, but then I'll show you another way too as well. So what I have here is 3 rows of double crochet stitches, 5 stitches on each row. And when I started this row and went this way, I put a stitch marker at the top of the 3 chains that are counting as my first stitch. So the stitch marker is inserted into that 3rd chain. Now I'm at the end of my row and I'm ready to turn. So what I want to do is I want to mark on this side, when I go back the other way, I want to have my other stitch marker in the 3rd chain on this side, because that way I'll know where my first stitch is when I'm coming back the other way, and it will then be the last stitch. And there won't be any question when you come to the end of the row as to how far you need to go before it's time to turn. So I'll show you what I mean. So when you start a new row in double crochet, you start with 3 chains. To do the method that I'm going to show you, you always pause right before you're going to do the stitch that you want the marker in. So in this situation, we're going to chain 2 and we're going to pause because we want the marker in the 3rd chain. We then take the hook out. So remember, this only works if you take the hook out, then you take the closed stitch marker and put it around the loop. Now if I let go of it, it might fall down like this. So I like to use my left hand to just kind of hold it in place. And then I'm going to put my hook back into that loop, and I will keep the stitch marker down out of the way while I go ahead and complete that 3rd chain. And you can see when I'm done the chain that now that stitch marker is embedded right where I want it to be. It's right inside that 3rd chain, marking this as the beginning of the row, and then when I come back the other way, it will tell me that I'm at the end. Now, because I'm doing double crochet, the chain 3 is counting as the first stitch. So I'm going to skip the first stitch and I'm going to work my first double crochet into the 2nd stitch, like so. And then I'll crochet across. And now, especially with double crochet, because the last stitch is actually a chain stitch, it looks a little different from its neighbors. It's not a true crochet stitch. And that's why having this stitch marker here is so helpful, because it tells me I've got 1 more true crochet stitch to go, but then I've still got this turning chain stitch as well. So I have 2 left. Now in a case where you've only got 5 stitches in your row, it's almost just as easy to count your stitches. But everyone knows that you can easily lose track when you're counting, especially as the numbers start to get really high. And it's also really nice to not have to constantly count. And so if you use your stitch markers, you'll be able to not have to worry about counting, to know when you're at the end. So there's my 4th, and like I said, my stitch marker is helpfully telling me that I've still got 1 more stitch to go. So I will go ahead and do my last double crochet in that row. And now that stitch marker has done its job, and I'm ready to take it out, and I'm going to turn my work. And once again, I'm going to mark my first stitch. Now, just to show you how it varies with the different stitches, I'm now going to switch to half double crochet and show you how it works with that. So with half double, we want 2 turning chains, and we want to mark the top turning chain because our 2 turning chains are going to count as the first stitch. So, like I said, we're going to pause before the stitch we want marked. So that means in this case, we chain 1, pause, put the closed stitch marker onto the loop, put our hook back in, and do our 2nd turning chain. And now it's the 2nd chain that has the stitch marker in it. Turn my work, skip the first stitch, and go into the 2nd stitch. And half double crochet across. And now as I'm nearing the end, I take a look, and I ask myself, do I have another stitch to go? And my stitch marker tells me that yes, I do, because do you see how it's in that last chain stitch there? It hasn't been worked yet. So I'm going to go ahead and do my final half double crochet. And now, because of my helpful stitch marker, I know it's time to stop and turn. That marker has done its job, we take it out. Now I'm going to switch to single crochet. So single crochet is a little different because the turning chain, there's only one of them because it's such a short stitch. And it does not count as the first stitch in the row. We ignore the turning chain essentially. We don't want to work into it when we're coming back because it's not counting as a stitch. Therefore, we do not want to mark the turning chain. We want to mark our first true single crochet. So I will do my turning chain, turn. Now I'm about to do the first true single crochet in the first stitch right here. And this is the one I want marked. So I will pause, take my hook out, close the marker, put the marker on the loop, hook back in, and go ahead and do my first single crochet. And when I finish the stitch, you can see the marker is embedded in that first stitch, telling me that this is where I want to end my row, not down here where the turning chain is. And then I can single crochet across. And that's it. That is my lesson on using stitch markers to keep your edges nice and straight. And now, as promised, I will just show you the another option. If the method that I showed you is a little bit too complicated or it just doesn't work for you, then you can always do it this way, where, so I'm still doing my single crochet row. I come to the end, I go ahead and I crochet into the marked chain, take the stitch marker out, turning chain, turn. Now I'm going to do my first single crochet, and rather than pause before I do the stitch that I want marked, you can always pause after you've done the stitch that you want marked. Actually, you don't need to take your hook out for this. Just set it down, pick up your stitch marker. You need to open it, and you have to open it with just the one hand, and then work it into the space where you want your needle to go, your hook to go when you're coming back, and close it up. And there, now we still have, you end up with the same result. That first stitch that we wanted marked is now marked. I just opt to teach the first method in my classes because I find this one is just a little bit awkward to have to open it and place it with the one hand. So that's it. That is how you keep your edges straight.